Good evening. It is Wednesday, August 19th, 2020. This is Terry Allen. It's the Radical Progressive here. And I was having a very interesting texting war and discussion with a friend of mine. He's a conservative, and I'm sure that you've heard this before. All the world's evils are caused by liberals. If you listen to Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh or any of these dumbasses on Fox News, for instance, you will hear it constantly. And, talking about the wonders of capitalism, how that has solved all the world's problems, and how all the world's problems now, or anytime the liberals get involved, socialism is a horrible evil. It's the same as communism in a lot of these people's minds. And so I was thinking, what if we lived in a perfect utopia of capitalism? Free trade, unregulated, unbridled capitalism, where profit is king. That is the only motivation, basically, is profit. And you can hear it all the time from companies to let the market work. If the market was just allowed to work and was not regulated, the market would work itself out. Because people that are doing bad things would not be able to compete in the market because people would find out, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm thinking about what this country would be like if it was purely capitalist. So I made a few notes and I came up with a list of things. One of the things you got to realize is that we actually have a lot of social programs in this country. We have Social Security and Medicare and highways, bridges, school, high school, and elementary school, EPA, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff. Fire departments, police departments. Everything is for the general welfare of the population. There was an actual general welfare clause in the Constitution that, that this was a country where we had, liberty, freedom, freedom of speech, all these wonderful things that we were getting, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, it never actually says that this should be a purely capitalist system. They just said that we should look out for the general welfare of the entire population. But since that time has happened, this freedom, liberty, these words have kind of got mixed up together, where if it's something that has the word free in front of it, suddenly it's good. And if it's regulated, it's bad. So let's take some examples, for instance. Let's say that in a purely capitalist system you had no regulations. Let's take one thing really to start right off, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Now, some of the things that the Food and Drug Administration have done, they've made regulations on food products and companies that make food, and they've forced companies to put on labels showing the contents of the food that they have, calorie counts, all these different kinds of things. Well, if you had no regulations, which is one of the things that the Trump administration and any Republican administration always is pushing to deregulate everything, deregulate the banks, deregulate this and that. So let's say that we completely deregulated everything and let's let the market work. So that means that food companies would not have to put labels on any of their products anymore, stating what's actually in the product. And if the market was allowed to work, we don't even need anybody to enforce the regulations, if there were any, because if the market's working, then we don't need to worry about it. So, for instance, you bought some food and it had some metal shavings in it, or some poison, and some people died, you would know, definitely not buying any food from that company again. So, that's how the market works. It's, it will weed out these problems, these little issues. So, same thing with drugs. If the company makes drugs and they're a reputable company, then you can be pretty sure that you'll get what you're supposed to get in the medicine. You got to trust these companies because they are capitalists. I mean, they are interested in profits, primarily profits, But, you know, it's people. They have heart. You know, they don't want to intentionally kill anybody just to make a profit. I mean, corporations would never do that. So, you know, you can take your chances. You got a pretty good chance of getting what you want in the medication, that it works the way you want it to work and things like that. So, you know, there's other things like, let's start with bridges and highways. Let's say in an unregulated, privatized system, all the bridges and highways would just have to get sold off. I mean, there's no point in having the government do any of that. So we sell off all the bridges. Companies buy up the bridges. Now, if a company buys a bridge for profit, they're going to have to collect money somehow to make their money back, to make a profit. So they would have to set up probably a toll booth of some kind, because, you know, it would be kind of crazy to have a transponder for every different bridge and highway. So I don't know how that would work. Eventually they could probably come up with a universal transponder. But for now, let's just build toll roads. Have anybody driven on toll roads back in the days when there actually were toll booths and not transponders? That was an exciting trip, because you would have thousands of cars lined up at these toll booths. But, you know, it's a free trade system. It's unregulated, so there's great benefits to that. You don't have hardly any taxes at all. I mean, I guess you wouldn't even need any taxes, because what would you have taxes for? I mean, if you have a completely unregulated system, you don't have any police departments, you don't have any fire departments, you don't have any public schools. With the bridges, I mean, how do you know if they're maintaining those bridges correctly? Because there's no regulations. So you just drive across the bridge and, you know, take your chances. Now, if a company that's not maintaining bridges properly and those bridges start to collapse, you'll know not to drive across those bridges again, or any bridge that's made by that company or maintained by that company. So, you know, we have to look at all of these situations, because we need to see what we're really up against here. You know, we don't want any of this evil socialist, you know, regulations coming in to screw everything up, and it actually makes more cost for the products. It, you know, makes everything more expensive. It's a hassle. So highways, the same thing. Let's just set up toll booths, because companies can buy up pieces of the highways here and there. And, you know, the most profitable areas would be the places where there's the most traffic, because you can collect the most tolls. And so you can just imagine a world with just millions of toll booths everywhere. But, you know, that's the price you got to pay. I mean, it's in the long run, it's better that way. So, I mean, that opens up a whole new possibility, a whole new world of profit-making options and opportunities. So, I mean, highways, you've got roads and curbs, and then you come down to things like water management and sewer systems, the electric grid. I mean, you know, some of that has been sold off to private companies, and, you know, it works pretty well. You know, no fire departments, so, you know, you don't, if you got a fire in your house, you better have a fire extinguisher there, or, you know, one that, hopefully you got some neighbors maybe with some water hoses or something. You know, you don't need a fire department, really. Same thing with the police department. If you can just get private security companies to take care of all that. You don't need you know, police departments. I mean, that's what the Republicans have always said, or lately, about the Democrats, is they want to defund the police, you know, get rid of all the police. That's, you know, according to Republicans, that's a bad idea. But see, you got socialism coming back in there again. So, you know, you can't have it both ways, you know. So let's not be hypocrites here. Conservatives like police departments, they really, really do, but that's a socialist program. Taxes are taken out of your income, property taxes, etc., to pay for the police department. So if you had security, private security, then if you had a lot of money, you could afford a really good one. And if you didn't have a lot of money, well, you could hope that maybe some security company would drive through the area every once in a while. And, you know, what you could do is like maybe they had back in the 20s, you know, the neighborhood mafia or the gangs. You know, if you had a business, they would come into your business and, you know, they would say things like, boy, it would really be a shame if your building burned down. It would be horrible. You know, or somebody broke your windows and stole all your products. We would hate to see that. So, you know, give us a little fee and we'll make sure that your building doesn't burn down. I mean, that was the good old days. You know, we don't really need all these regulations and all these rules. Let's not be hypocrites. We don't need police, okay? So, the thing is, though, is that who's going to go pick up the criminals? I mean, the people that are breaking into things. Because, I mean, if you don't have a police department and you don't have regulations, you don't even need a court system. I mean, what do you need a court system for? You know, we can get rid of all the attorneys, all these stupid judges, you know, making all these rulings, because 95% of all the cases are, they're not, you don't even have trials. They're all plea bargains. You know, we only have 5% that actually have trials. So once again, we need to really look at this situation to see how this would work out. So what would keep companies from just creating their own police departments, or their neighborhoods could create their own police departments? And then that comes in, now we've got to look at the prison situation, because if you don't have any police to pick up the criminals, to take them to prison, and you don't have any courts, then what do you do about criminals? And then the prisons, you don't really need, you know, public prisons. And we've already got private prisons. They work very well because they run on slave labor. They rent out or sell out they do contracts with different companies to make things and products and services. And, you know, the prisoners are actually really good workers for 22 cents an hour, which is what I think they pay them. That's not a bad deal. I think companies get a really good discount on that. So private prisons already work. We know that's a great system. Republicans love those. So what would keep a police department from just picking up people randomly? Like, you look around for maybe the strongest guys in the neighborhood and just round them up and take them to prison, because then you've got really cheap labor. Oh, but then that brings in the slavery issue too, because then who would stop people from just starting slave labor camps? I mean, the whole thing starts to unravel. But let's get back on track, you know, because the market does work these things out, you know. I mean, according to conservatives and Republicans, these things all work themselves out. Just let the market work. Do not try to interfere with the market. It's what Adam Smith used to call the hidden hand of capitalism. It just somehow works itself out. So I have this list I was working on, and so let's say no building codes, because we don't have regulations, we don't have any enforcement. So how can you have a building code? So basically, you can modify your house any way you want. If you want to hire a couple of guys off the street to make maybe a second floor in your house, or even buildings, public buildings, or, you know, high rises, anything. You don't have rules, so you can do it any way you want. And that's the way the market works, because let's say that you build a building, you know, that's not structurally sound, and some people move into it and then it collapses. You know, you're going to know not to buy a building made by that company, or not rent an apartment in a company like that, in an apartment made by a company like that. Same thing with high rises. You know, if a company that doesn't know what the hell they're doing, but they get a really good cheap price to build a skyscraper or a building, and the whole thing collapses and thousands of people die, you'll know definitely not to rent an apartment or have an office in a building like that. The market works itself out. Everything is cool. Let's see, what else is on my list here? We've got schools. That's a great one, because these pesky public school systems teaching all these kids for free. I mean, it's an abomination. Public schools, according to Betsy DeVos, is just, it's terrible. You should have everything private. Private schools are better. They've always been telling me that private schools are much better. Now, I went to a private school run by a church, and I could mention the name of the church. It was Seventh-day Adventist when I was a kid. But what I learned was that the earth was only 6,000 years old, because according to the Bible, if you count back, Abraham and Moses and all these other people, you can't count the ages and work it all out back to Adam and Eve, you end up with about 6,000 years. Now, there was a problem with fossils, like dinosaur fossils and things like that. So they didn't bother to mention that to me about dinosaurs or fossils or biology, really, in any evolutionary sense. Everything was based on creationism. And so I got an awesome education. When I got out of high school, I thought I knew everything. But then I went to college and I found out there's dinosaurs. Like, what the heck? Well, then what they said was, well, anything that comes in, any education that comes in that undermines this 6,000-year-old, creation story, it's not a theory, it's a fact, according to the Bible. That's the devil. He's talking right in your ear, letting you know that, hey, there's another way. Maybe God might be lying to you here. Something just might not be right here. So I had an excuse. We had a way of getting out of all this crazy ideas. Like, for instance, in the Bible, Jesus said that you don't need to wash your hands, and he said specifically, it doesn't matter what goes into your mouth. What's important is what comes out. So when it comes to germs and viruses and all these other things, the right wing, especially evangelicals, can definitely tell you on that situation. Just pray about that, and that's God's department. Jesus and God's department. They handle all of that stuff. The market doesn't even need to be involved in that. You don't need all these regulations, and it's, Trump says anytime we have a new regulation, we need to get rid of two old ones. So, that's working out very well. Eventually, when you do that, you end up with no regulations, which is what we're actually trying to achieve here. Now, let's say that brings us around to hospitals and even this whole COVID situation, with the pandemic. With the hospitals, right now, it's, you have poor people and people that show up at the emergency rooms, they're dying, or, whatever. The hospitals have to treat them, and then you've got a big burden on your hands here with all these poor people running around getting free health care. It just bogs down the system. It's just not right. We should have private insurance, private hospitals. And if you show up to the hospital and you don't have any money or you don't have a job, too damn bad, because that's the way the private system works. If you want to look at free trade, pure capitalism, if you don't have money, you don't get it, okay? That's just the way it works. No free lunches here. Now, you could, if you do have a job but you don't have money right there, you could fill out a credit app, and then they could decide whether you were a good risk, Now, if you're going to have a heart transplant or something and you're looking at a couple $100,000, that's going to be dicey. That's going to be really tough, because probably none of the rich can afford, all these really high-end, very expensive medical procedures. So, that all works itself out. The market works itself out. Don't worry about it. Now, if people start dying and bodies start to pile up, the problem is we don't have any, public health departments, and we don't have anybody picking up all these bodies. Now, if these bodies are piling up around, gated communities where a lot of rich people live. Now they might be able to hire somebody to actually come in and pick up all these bodies, and maybe they just dig a big hole and just pour them all in there, dump them all in there, and just cover it all up. Because who's going to take the time to find out who these people are related to? Because maybe these people are related to somebody that might have money that could bury them, but probably they don't. Otherwise, why would they be dying outside your neighborhood? So let's just dig a hole and throw them in there. There's nothing regulated anyway, so who cares? Nobody's really going to say anything. So let's move on to the COVID situation. Now, I've been hearing that wearing a mask is actually a violation of my civil rights, and I should not have to be forced to wear a mask, damn it, because that is violating my civil rights. Now, my dad used to tell me once that your rights end where my nose begins, but I don't think that's in the Constitution. I don't know if there's any laws that were written specifically about that, so I don't know if that's really something that could really work. So hey, if you don't want to wear a mask, don't worry about it. Grocery stores, you cannot put these signs up anymore, these stupid signs about how you can't come in here without a mask. You gotta wash your hands all the time, and they got a little bottle of hand sanitizer out there, but you don't have to use it. Now, once again, if you have private hospitals and you have no regulations, who's going to really even know who has the virus and who doesn't? Who's going to make all of the lists of who's dead and who isn't, and how you died? Did you die because of COVID, or maybe it was some other reason? See, that's what a lot of people were complaining about, is these COVID deaths are probably actually not that high, because most of these people probably died by something else. But because the hospitals get money, because if they die of COVID or some crazy idea like that, they get more money. So they've been faking the numbers. But now they don't even need to make numbers at all. So you might not even know there is a pandemic going on. And that's, a lot of people say what you don't know won't hurt you. So maybe in this case, that's exactly how it would work. Let me look at my list here. Oh yeah, I got off the track about the schools. Yes, my daughter was in a private school for a while. She went to a Catholic church over here in Los Angeles, and it was kind of expensive. It was almost $600 a month, and we looked it up, and it was supposed to be the best Catholic school in the whole area. It was highly recommended. So she went there for a couple of years, and we started having some issues with her grades. We would go to these meetings, parent-teacher meetings, and they would say, "Oh, she's doing wonderful, she's doing great." And then we get the report card, and she had a D. It's like, well, what's going on? And we got a few excuses and things like that. So what ended up happening was we discovered that the lady that was teaching English was actually a PE teacher, but the guy that was teaching PE was actually a history teacher. And so we discovered that you don't really have to have a specialty in any classes. You have to you do need to have some type of certificate or a degree in education, but you don't need to really specialize in the class that you're teaching. So you've got history books and English books and biology books. But then we get back to that situation with no regulations, because in a free trade market system, the market determines everything. So if you're reading, a history book or a biology book and there's stuff wrong in it, then you'll know not to buy books from that company anymore. So that's how the market works. Unfortunately, there was a sad incident where there was a janitor that worked there at the Catholic school, and somebody caught him in the janitor closet, where he kept all the mops and the buckets with one of the little girls. But, with no regulations and no police department, none of that. Anyway, he was the brother of the principal, so they hadn't checked him out anyway. So I don't know what happened with that. I think they kind of got all just brushed under the rug. Anyway, we had to pull her out, and we put her in a public school. Well, that was a disaster too. So, hey, there you go. Anyway, let's get back to my list here. I remember about the school that I went to. There wasn't really an emphasis on learning because we had a Bible class, and in the Bible, Jesus is coming back very soon. In fact, they used to tell me it's right around the corner. That was 45, 50 years ago. But see, biblically, right around the corner could mean, 15 minutes, 15 years, 1,500 years. It's just how big is that corner, basically. So why learn anything really long term? Because Jesus is coming back anyway, and it's only important to make your heart ready for him and believe. You better believe, because if you don't believe and you don't have faith, then you're really going to get screwed, because then you don't get to go to heaven, because they've got mansions ready for you up there, free places to live, and everybody gets the same mansion because you don't want anybody getting jealous. So what ends up happening is, wait a minute, that ends up sounding like communism, actually. Who's going to make the food? Oh, I guess Jesus and God does all that. All the food is just like, bing, they have a big magic wand up there, and they just make the food every day, and you can go out on the trees and pick the food, and nobody really has to work. Boy, that sure does sound like communism to me. But let's not get off track here. I don't think the evangelicals would like that. We might have to have a discussion with some of them. Moving on, we have private armies now because we have no government. In fact, if we have no taxes, then we don't have Congress and Senate, and we don't even have a president, because we don't need any of that, because the market works everything out. It all works out. So in the end, we are in utopia. This is the perfect capitalist, free trade, unbridled, unregulated capitalist system, and that is utopia. You can talk to any billionaire or multimillionaire in this country, and they will tell you that the problem is socialism and regulations, having their foot on the billionaire's neck and corporation's neck, and that is the problem. If we're just allowed to worry about profits and the market, everything works itself out. Now, if you have no armies, but you're going to need an army, I think, because some other countries are not going to be pure capitalists. There's going to be these evil socialist countries around. So if you have no crime fighting, you have no police departments, but you have private police, you could just get private armies. And then, well, who's going to make the army? Who's going to pay for the army? I think that would be like in the area of the oligarchy. The billionaires could probably afford an army. Now, when you're dealing with nuclear weapons and bombs and stuff like that, now who's going to do all the research and development and all of that? It gets kind of messy. But you got to have an army, because we've got oil companies and we've got all these industries all around the world, and they can't just do whatever they want in these countries. Now, they want to, like in the Middle East, the oil companies want to be able to get their natural resources from anywhere they want, and these pesky countries over there, like Syria, and Iran, messing everything up, Libya and Iraq, screwing everything up for the oil companies and the companies looking for natural resources, that we had to have an army. Because how could these companies do what they run their free trade capitalism bullshit if there's no army to back them up? So we got to have armies, okay? You have to have an army in a capitalist system if you're going to have companies overseas. But you can just make your own armies. So basically, we could hire mercenary armies. That's kind of what we got now, actually. So let's picture that. Like for instance in Venezuela, they have oil there. We want it. They don't want us to steal it. So we can just go in and take it. Like Trump said, I think he was in a meeting, and he said, why don't we just go down there and take it? Venezuela's in our backyard anyway. I remember John Bolton, I think, thought that was pretty funny. I don't know if he came up with that idea or Trump actually did. But be it that, you can see the situation here. We're going to have a big problem. Like Bolivia had a huge natural resource called lithium. Now, we need lithium really badly for all of our new batteries, electric cars, and all this. Elon Musk actually said, too bad, Bolivia. Your government got overthrown, but hey, we need that lithium. So it gets kind of a gray area where somebody's got to make these decisions. Do we go in and just take the oil? Or do we ask for it? Or do we pay for it? Or do we work out a barter deal? Or do we just get an army in there and just bomb the crap out of this country back to the Stone Age so that we can just stroll in and take the oil? Now, in Libya, that's kind of what happened. You had Obama and Queen Hillary, and Joe Biden, remember, he was the vice president. They all signed off on this. The situation in Libya. Now, Gaddafi was this horrible dictator. Now, he had signed a nuclear non-proliferation agreement where they were going to dismantle their nuclear research department, and then they were going to get a guarantee that they would not be invaded. But once they got rid of their nuclear weapon program, then we invaded. And that's just the way it works, buddy. I mean, So that country has been completely destroyed. We got rid of Gaddafi, but I think Al-Qaeda took over. But that's okay because, it's a free trade, purely unregulated capitalist system. The survival of the fittest, I think they call it. It's, in fact, for the working class, they call it rugged individualism. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Now, Trump, he got $200 million from his father to start some businesses. You can't always hope that that's going to work out because most people don't have parents with that much money. Now, Trump was lucky. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth or a gold spoon in his mouth, or something was in his mouth when he was born. He was one of the lucky ones. Now, apparently he bankrupted a casino, which I understand, actually, people I talked to, it's actually quite difficult because the profit margins are pretty huge in a casino. So how do you bankrupt a casino? I think I read that he just kept taking money out of it and didn't put anything back in, let the hotel fall apart. He went bankrupt 6 times. Now, here we come into another situation here, because when you're building a very expensive building, typically you need to get a loan. And if you get a loan, you need to have the credit to pay back the loan. Now, otherwise, the bank is not going to loan you the money. Now, he ended up with a problem because he had gone bankrupt so many times. He couldn't get loans in the United States anymore, so he ended up having to go to the Deutsche Bank in Germany. I think he tried to work out a deal with the oligarchy in Russia, but that didn't work out. So, anyway, now that takes us back to the 20s again, because back then you could just borrow money from the mafia. Loan sharks, I think they call them, and if you didn't pay the money back, you don't have to worry about excuses. They would just come, and if you didn't have the money, then they might have to break your legs or something. But then the problem goes is that the hospitals won't let you come in because you see, it all starts to unravel again. So how do we work this out? I guess we're just going to have to let the market work. So if you've got money and you can loan it to somebody, you want your interest paid back, by God, and if it doesn't get paid back, we're going to have to build debtors' prisons. But then if you're in a debtor's prison, you definitely can't. But wait a minute, we could have you work and work off the debt. That would be like private prison. So it actually does work out. It all fits. Those pieces all work together. Let's see, how else does that work now? That ties back into the protection racket, where if you have a business and you want to get protected against the local gangs, and you have to cut a deal with the mafia, or you could cut a deal with the gang, then you might get a better deal from the gang. Actually, those gangs are usually in the neighborhood, and then they could have maybe a war with the mafia. I mean, it could get kind of fun, actually, kind of exciting. You never know from one day to the next what's going to happen. One day you got the mafia running everything, the next day the gangs are handling everything. And the other exciting thing that I remember now is that with no regulations and no laws and no police, you can start driving drunk and high again. Yippee! Yee! All right, that's going to be cool. I don't know who's going to do that. I think the market works on that, where if people start crashing into each other, you know, like bumper cars on the highway because there's so many drunk and high people, that somehow the market works that out. And I don't know exactly. I'm going to have to talk to somebody that knows more about that than I do. Somehow the market will work that out. I'm going to have to look into that and see how that could be taken care of. I suppose that private army could come back in the United States and we could maintain order and stability with our own private armies. But do you kind of see the point? I don't know how this would really, because it all seems to, you try to put the pieces together, but then another piece comes unraveled, and then you try to take that piece and put it back into the situation, but then that becomes unraveled, and it just, I don't know. But capitalists and conservatives and these libertarians need to really analyze this stuff, because this country is actually very socialized. And I think if you really analyze the situation, it might be the better way. It actually, socialism in a, what good socialism is what's called a regulated capitalist society, where you're allowed to have capitalism, but it needs to be regulated. You know, you need to have an FDA and an EPA, and you need to have, you know, government-run agencies and police departments and fire departments. You really do need them. You know, I mean, come on. I think the capitalists, if they really analyze it, they'll say that, yes, some of these social programs actually are good. Like for instance, when the banks crashed the economy and had committed fraud and you know, criminal activities, and they crashed the banking system, and then they ran to the government because, remember the hearings they had in 2009? Obama had been just elected. The economy was crashing because of George W., but actually it was because of Bill Clinton had deregulated the banking industry by getting rid of Glass-Steagall, which allowed the banks to do all the things that they did. And the SEC was looking the other way, because a lot of times it's like musical chairs, you know, where a guy gets out of Congress but then goes work for a bank, but then maybe the banker moves to the regulating agency, and then it kind of just, they all kind of, you know, the lobbies, they all kind of mix and match things. So the SEC wasn't really working at its peak. So what ended up happening was the banks came running, the Fed came running to the federal government, and they wanted some money, but they wanted a bailout. It wasn't a loan, it was a bailout. So that's kind of like socialism, but that's socialism for the rich. So it just doesn't make any sense. It ends up being a mishmash. So, you know, we need to analyze this a little closer. We need to sit down with some conservatives and some libertarians and lay this out on the table and say, okay, which social programs do you like and which social programs do you not like? And then we can try to figure out what's bad socialism and what's good socialism, because obviously there are some good socialist programs out there. So I think I'm done with my list. It does look like free trade capitalism does devolve into feudalism. And you should look up feudalism, because feudalism, socialism, Stalinism, feudalism, communism, all these isms are all different. And you really need to know the difference, because a lot of my conservative friends all just kind of get mixed up when they're talking about socialism and communism. They sort of get it mixed up and think they're both the same, which they are not the same. And so the conservatives and the libertarians are very confused. They don't read dictionaries, they don't read history, they don't know anything about the labor movement and how we ended up with a 40-hour work week, and how we got rid of child labor, and how we ended up with vacations and different great things, which was kind of socialism. But anyway, I'm going to end it for today. I think that's probably enough. And we can discuss this further at some time. I may go into certain details and things like that. But anyway, let's call it an end. This is Terry Allen, a radical progressive, and we have some exciting times ahead of us. I mean, Joe Biden and Harris are going to come running into the White House to save the day, but their numbers are dropping now. So I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. That's what makes it more exciting, is because we don't really know how it's all going to turn out. It's like a really great movie, and nobody knows what the ending is going to be. So let's see how it goes. All right, everybody, have a good evening, and we will talk tomorrow.